Hi there and welcome to the show. Now, I know you're aware of the Houses of Parliament and that's a pretty impressive house. But were you aware of the Gardens of Parliament? There's quite a few of them and I'm going to take you for a stroll through them a little later. But first, here's what we've elected to show you this week.
I've driven the 370 kilometres southeast from Adelaide to see the country garden that Sue and John Zwar created through 40 years of hard work.
Last week, I sowed my first crop of autumn carrots. And this week, my next lot of root vegetables is going in. And the great thing about them is they're just as tasty above the ground as they are below.
If you asked me to name one place where you couldn't grow plants, I would say a car park. But I'd be wrong.
So, with the legislation now passed through the House of Representatives, the big challenge for the government is to convince the cross...
This is a daily occurrence outside Parliament House. Experienced journos luring the politicians outside for comment. Well, today, we're going inside to have a look at some of the secret courtyards behind the facade. Let's go. Hey, thanks, Mark.
On you, mate.
Sorry for the disturbance.
Not at all, although the government may have some unexpected challenges on its hands today.
These silver birches are nice.
Yeah, they're really good.
Giving me a tour of the gardens is my old mate, Paul Janssens. He's the head gardening honcho here and a man dedicated to his job.
So, Paul, how long have you been hanging outside the halls of power?
Bit too long, I think, Costa. I started at the old Parliament House in 1986 and then watched this building being built from down there, and then in 1988 we moved up.
How big is the Parliament and the gardens associated with it?
The parliamentary precinct is 33 hectares, but there's 23 hectares of gardens, so it's quite substantial.
Inside the building, there are 17 internal courtyards that the public never gets to see. Like this courtyard, which is for the exclusive use of the President of the Senate.
So we've got all Australian native plants in here, and you'll get parliamentarians from other countries coming, and they may have high-level talks with the President, and this might be the only flora of Australia that they see. So we try and have a variety of different Australian native plants, hoping that they'll remember a bit of what they saw maybe while they were in these courtyards. This is the Prime Minister's courtyard, and it's the only one with a theme. And the theme is really about the northern arid areas of Australia. So we've got the Olgas, the sculpture there, or Catachuca, and also this water feature represents those gorges like Catherine Gorge in the Northern Territory. We have this wisteria growing over this 170-year-old jarrah from Western Australia. And then the pond here comes down and splashes into this disc. So it represents the wet and dry of that Northern Australia area.
So this courtyard's got another feel of its own too.
Yeah, it's one of the larger ones, but it's a really nice courtyard with these Malus ioensis.
Yeah.
And also on the other side, the black birch, the Betula nigra, with a beautiful paper bark.
Yeah.
So this is one of our red maples. It's a beautiful tree with amazing autumn colour in May. Where we're standing right now is where the media hold a lot of press conferences and interview parliamentarians. And that quite often happens in May when the budget's being discussed and released. So the media have, as a consequence, nicknamed this tree the budget tree.
This is a really beautiful courtyard.
Yeah, it's a nice, peaceful courtyard.
And the features here, you've got the gladitzias, but these dogwoods are spectacular. The flower here, it's just held really tight and it captures your attention. And when they open up, I mean, they're quite large. They're like the palm of your hand.
Yeah, but quite delicate. They'll fall off quite easy. If you have them in a windy area, yeah, they don't stay on the tree very long. So shade is one of the problems that we deal with in the courtyards at Parliament House, and these trees actually allow a bit more light through than some of the other trees that we have.
So you can get your understory varieties growing.
Yeah.
I can see there's a bit of work going on. How many staff have you got looking after this place?
Yeah, we've got 11 horticulturists and I've got 4 greenkeepers, and then there's myself in a management position and I've got a clerical support person. So there's 17 on the team, but 15 that actually get their hands dirty and do all the great work.
I couldn't think of a better place to finish our tour off than up here on the roof of Parliament House. What an epic view.
Yeah, it's such a great place to work and the view's fantastic.
Now, I've been meaning to ask you, what do you reckon? I can just imagine here, this whole space, a veggie garden. Feed all the politicians. Imagine veggies from it look great from up above. I can see it, and then it can go to the next, and the next, and we're going to take it down here to the old Parliament.
In Queensland, one common gardening question I get asked is, what can I grow at the base of palms? Now, this is a Chilean wine palm, and typically it produces quite dense evergreen shade, and the roots are strong and fibrous, so it's very difficult to cultivate the soil at the base. So the sort of plants that accept shallow soils are things like dracaenas, Dracaena marginata tricolour, and bulbs, like this Crinum powellii alba. It has beautiful scented white flowers. And then there's bromeliads. This pineapple does well where it gets a little bit more sunshine, but further back in the shade, air plants like this Tillandsia do extraordinarily well. They don't really have strong root systems at all. Most of the action occurs in the leaves. That's where they absorb water and nutrients. And you put all these things together, and all they really need is mulching every 6 months.
Sue and John Zwar met at Adelaide Uni in the 60s. They were both born and bred in the bush and got back to it as soon as they could. John took a teaching job at Penola High School, and they bought a 145-hectare grazing property in nearby Coonawarra, one of Australia's premier wine regions. I've driven the 370 kilometres southeast from Adelaide to see the country garden that the Zwars have created through 40 years of hard work.
Sophie.
How are you, John? Hello, Sue. Good to see you. Garden's looking specky. Let's go exploring.
I think Sue and I are a great team because she helps me on the farm and I help her in the garden. I think that's the best way of explaining it.
The only time we have conflict, well, there's 2 things. Number 1, the rambling roses eat John when he's mowing, and so he has his snips, and that can create a little bit of conflict. Number 2, I sometimes need him to use the chainsaw, and a man with a chainsaw doesn't quite know when to stop.
It's a massive garden. You must spend every waking moment out here.
I'd love to, but I can't.
Yes, I love to spend all my time with my cars, but I can't either. Very little time gets spent with my cars.
So, John's having some me time. He can work on his precious Grand Tourers, while Sue gives me the Grand Tour of the garden.
As soon as we bought the place, we were thinking about what we could call it. And John's a person who's got the ideas, so he was fiddling around with names, and we came up with the only tree that grows here naturally is the river red gum, Eucalyptus camaugelensis, of which that's a magnificent specimen.
Isn't it amazing?
And so he was using that, and the other word that we used was Wald, which is the German word for forest. So it's Camelwald, we made it anglicised. Camelwald really means sort of red gum forest. This particular red gum, we were told, could be anything up to 500 years old, so it's pretty special when you realise it was here. It was a mature tree long before white man ever set foot in Australia.
Isn't that awesome? And you've positioned deciduous trees in amongst the gums to really highlight them. I mean, this golden elm is amazing.
It was grafted for some unknown reason onto the cork elm, and I think that could be the reason why it's grown so big, because the other golden elms we've got in the place were grafted onto Chinese elms, and they've never grown anything like the size of this one. And this is my favourite tree. This is a taxodium, which you don't see very often because it's too big for suburban gardens, but I just love it. It's one of the few deciduous conifers, so you can see the cones on the tree, and it's at its best at the moment.
It's amazing, isn't it? Well, it's often called a swamp cypress and comes from the Everglades, and I love the fact that the tree has those sort of aerial roots or knobbly knees. And I noticed that in the lawn, they're now flat, so John's obviously been mowing those knees, and they look like giant stepping stones, or even cowpats.
Yes. Actually, they would be lovely if they were never mowed, but it's a bit late now and we need the lawn. So.
And right next to it, as a perfect contrast at the moment, you've got the golden ash.
The golden ash is beautiful, and we also have a magnificent trident maple, which is at its very best too.
Sue, this view is amazing. Look at the reflection in the lake.
Yes, we've got a grey leaf poplar there that we should have got rid of because it suckers badly, but I can't resist it. It's one of the few poplars that have red foliage, and the reflections, as I say, are just lovely. And then behind it are some more claret ashes, which are also reflected. They're very pretty. There's also a lovely pistachio, which is a golden yellow at the moment. They're supposed to be red, but mine is not red. It's a golden yellow, and it's very pretty.
Sue has roses dotted throughout the garden, even in the Cochrane-Ng.
Yes, this is one of my favourites. It's the sweetheart rose, Cecilbrunner, which is a China rose, very old, and they brought the repeat flowering gene into the European roses. Its neighbour there is a sport called Pearl d'Or, which is one of my very favourite roses. Now this is November Glory, Sophie. It's one of those multifloras that only flower in spring, but in autumn have beautiful hips.
Isn't it stunning? And what's this lovely double one over here?
This is Bunya's Noisette. It's what they call a found rose, as the name suggests, found in the Bunya Mountains. And it's a beautiful rose, I think, with a lovely scent.
Isn't that gorgeous, is it? Oh, isn't that stunning?
Yeah, it's lovely.
And this amazing massive hips here.
This, I think, is a seedling from Rosa brunonii. Again, it only flowers in spring, white flowers, but in autumn it looks absolutely beautiful. But I've got to keep cutting it back because this is one of the roses that keeps eating John when he mows the grass.
Now, this garden is quite a large one, Sue, isn't it? How big is it?
We started off fencing off about 5 acres before we built the house, and gradually over the years that's extended to about 10.
Most gardeners will be envious of all the space Sue and John have here, but being in the country does have its downside.
The biggest one is rabbits. We're inundated with rabbits and they dig holes everywhere. Everything I plant I have to fence off with wire netting. We've also got parrots, crimson lorikeets, and the odd wallaby.
Wonderful. Sue and John have stared down every adversity they've encountered and transformed the landscape. The quality and scale of their achievement is awesome.
I think gardeners are optimists, and you have a lot of fun imagining what's going to be, and it never seems to come up to expectations, but you have great fun trying.
When is the best time to transplant a plant? Generally speaking, autumn is the best time because the soil is warm and that allows the roots to heal and the plants to get over the shock. But there are some exceptions. Camellias are a classic. They transplant best in the middle of winter, which often coincides with full bloom. It may seem weird, but that's when they transplant best. Now, the rule for transplanting anything is to give it a good soak the day before you move it. That means it's fully hydrated before you cut the roots.
Hardening off is a quirky gardening term, and it simply means where you move plants that you've been growing, seeds or cuttings, from the shade in stages out so they can take full sun. I've been growing these cuttings of salvia in the shade, and if I pop them straight out into the garden where they're going to grow, they might shrivel. You need to harden them off because they're quite tender at this stage. Do that by just putting them underneath the shade of a bush or a tree like a lemon, perfect. Leave them there for a week or so and then move them out into full sun because they'll be able to cope by that stage.
Composting is the cornerstone to every good garden. But can all weeds be composted? Well, it depends on how hot your compost gets. If it gets to 65 degrees and above, it should kill most weeds and seeds, but rarely do home composting systems get that hot, which means if we've got things like cooch with its persistent rhizomes or bulbous weeds, well, if we put those in and they don't get cooked and then we apply the compost, you can reinfest it into the rest of the garden. So best to put this stuff in the bin.
Last week, I sowed my first crop of autumn carrots. And this week, my next lot of root vegetables is going in. And the great thing about them is they're just as tasty above the ground as they are below. I've got 3 different crops. I got some beetroot, I got some turnips, and I've got some radishes. And just like the carrots, they're best grown from seed. And I'll be showing you 3 different ways of putting them in the ground. The first task is to prepare the soil with a good amount of compost. If you're growing these just for the roots, avoid nitrogen-rich fertilisers, which encourage leaves at the cost of root growth. Break up any lumps as you go because the roots need to be able to grow straight through the soil. Now, we're all familiar with turnips for that juicy, bulbous stem that they develop. But for me, the true beauty of this plant is what grows above the ground. The shoots or the head are probably the sweetest part of any brassica you'll ever try. Now, because they're tiny seeds, it can be a good idea to put a bit of sand in a jar, in with about 1/3 of a jar of sand, a bit more than that. And then all you need is to get a lid and punch a hole in it that's big enough for that sand and that seed to go through. Plug up the hole, give the jar a shake, and that should mix all the seed evenly through the sand, and then you're ready to plant. After making a rill, I simply sprinkle in the sand and the seed as I go. This is a great technique for people who may have trouble with handling the tiny seed and for anyone who finds them too small to see properly. Turnips, being a brassica, are hungry plants. Now, normally I'd fertilise, but this soil is fantastic, so I don't need to. But if your soil's a bit poorer, a handful of blood and bone won't go astray. Check out these lumpy little chunks. They're actually beetroot seed. They're an aggregate seed, which means you're going to get multiple seedlings from the one spot. So it's important that you thin those out. But what I want to show you is this little origami pourer that Margot from the garden's made for us. It's a great little way of dispensing seeds, especially if you have problems like arthritis. It just makes the task that much easier. Just like their close cousin silver beet, beetroot leaves are delicious. So you get 2 crops for the price of 1. You can soak the seed overnight before planting, but they do germinate quickly anyway. If you think those sowing methods are easy, I've saved the easiest till last. This is seed tape. It's available from the seed section at your nursery. And the crop I'm putting in is radishes, probably the fastest germinating crop in the universe. Because I don't want to break up the line of my tape, I'm just getting a bit of dirt and breaking it up between my hands to cover it up. It only needs a light covering. I've got some beetroot and some radish here that were sown only 10 days ago. They're almost instant rewards. So why don't you get out there and plant some greenery that you can be harvesting throughout autumn and the winter.
Planting into a rocky spot can be difficult, but any little crevice can hold a plant. What you need to do is to, into the planting hole, get as much good material as you can, like a bit of planting mix, a bit of compost mixed up with some mushroom compost, for instance, and for extra nutrition, a handful or so of rock dust. dig the hole as best you can, put the planting mix in, and then plant as you would normally do, making sure that the roots are well down. This is a Chinese indigo, an indigofera, and once it's established, it will be quite drought tolerant. In fact, it will send out its roots under all those rocks and stones for a bit of cool. It'll grow very well. So, don't be put off by a rocky garden. Make sure you use every little crevice.
If you asked me to name one place where you couldn't grow plants, I would say a car park. But I'd be wrong.
This space used to be just that, a car park, devoid of anything green and deeply uninspiring. But over the last 5 years, it's been transformed. It's now a lush oasis, housing various spaces for eating, drinking and relaxing. But most of all, it's a labour of love. Erin Martin is the horticulturist responsible for this incredible transformation right here at the grounds in Alexandria in Sydney.
Erin, I think what everyone is going to be amazed by is the scale of what you've created here. When I say car park, it doesn't resemble a car park at all. What are all the different spaces here?
There are 6 different spaces here, the patio, the main arbour, then you've got the barn, and then you've got the potting shed, the laneways. Basically, we've been given a different brief and concept for each space.
And in terms of the plantings, what plants have you used?
Oh, so many different species of plants. We did try and steer away from deciduous plants because we like it to be green and lush all year round. But we are starting to move to that since we've been doing a bit more cottage, parterre, English garden style. So we're using a lot more aces, we're using magnolias, we're using peaches and cherries, just to give it a bit more colour through autumn.
And I've seen the size. Obviously, you've got a number of trees as well. How difficult is it to plant trees in huge pots in this sort of environment?
Well, I've always believed that gardening is about the soil. So whenever we put effort in, we put it into the soil first. We make sure it's got good water retention, good airfill porosity, and most of all, good drainage. So you mulch well, you drain well, and you feed well. If you do that, the rest of the tree does everything else for you.
Lovely and well drained. Now we can hear the chickens crowing, a bit of an unusual addition to a car park garden. Why have you got the animals here?
In the centre of Sydney, we all live in apartments. We bought animals here for all the people in the city to come and see animals. We do give the animals a lot of love and affection, and we take them for walks. They live a fantastic life. And one of the highlights...
You take the pig for a walk?
Oh, yeah. We actually have a pig walker.
Really?
Yes, we've got 2 pig walkers that come in regularly and take Kevin for a bit of a trot.
Wow.
We get a lot of people coming here and just bringing their lunch and sitting in the garden just because we are in an industrial sector. So that dark, cool, secret garden space is what people come for.
Well, Erin, a lot of people would have this pot plant, this devil's ivy, growing in their homes, but I don't think anyone would have ever seen it on this scale before. I mean, this is quite extraordinary. What gave you the idea to do this?
I was given the brief of a green ceiling above an event space, and it is quite low light, so this was about the perfect plant for it.
Maintenance-wise, how difficult is it keeping it looking so lush?
This plant, by nature, drops its old leaves, or the old leaves become yellow, and because it is such a high-profile space, we have to remove the dead leaves every second day.
And what would you say would have been the biggest challenge in setting up this garden in a car park for you?
Drainage. Car parks don't drain very well. Plants don't enjoy being sat in water for extended periods, so draining out the garden has meant it's been a lot of work. When we started this garden, we weren't expecting it to be what it has become, we weren't expecting to see 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people in a day. And when there's 3,000 people picking petals and all the rest, it's very hard on the garden.
So it creates a lot of maintenance as well.
A lot of maintenance.
And you should never ask a parent this, but is there a favourite plant or a bush that you have here?
Okay, so I do get asked this every day. So my favourite climber at the moment would be Stephanotis floribunda. It's so fragrant, it grows so quickly. Favourite shrub, you'll see it a lot in most of my gardens, is probably Duranta China doll. It's a shrub that you can topiary, you can hedge it, you can let it just go wild and flower. You can do whatever you want with it and it takes it easily.
And would you like to see other spaces like this in the city transformed in similar ways?
This garden didn't happen overnight. This has been a 5-year process. And most cafes and businesses, especially in hospitality, aren't willing to commit the capital to develop a garden space like this. They don't see the long-term benefits that it's going to have. We need plants. People need to get their hands dirty. They need those microbes, they need that exposure, and people don't get it anymore, especially in big cities.
I've found these gardens so inspiring. The grounds have cleverly shown us how we can reimagine our urban spaces. Why settle for tarmac and concrete when we can create these botanically rich environments that everyone can enjoy?
I've had the best time showing you around the parliamentary courtyards. That's all from me, your gardening correspondent, Costa Georgiadis, Canberra. Oh, and by the way, here's what's coming up on next week's show.
I'm visiting one of my favourite gardens, Carrick Hill, a grand historic estate on the foothills of Adelaide.
I'm flat out working on a garden with Jane. We're at a centre run by Uralla, and we responded to their call out to help create a garden that's accessible to the residents and the staff.
And I'm going to show you how to grow an edible cubby house using only a stick, some string and a packet of seeds. Squid's already digging the hole.